So, if there is a proud boast that can be made by any educated person, and it's an awful word, it sounds so elitist, it sounds so smug, so self-satisfied to describe oneself as educated. But if there is a proud boast that any of us can utter, as Cambridge graduates in my case, as Harvard graduates or undergraduates in your cases, it is, I won't be told. I will not be told. I will be shown, I will be inspired, I will be led, but I won't be told. The history of the world and the world's knowledge might be said to be divided into two forms. There is revealed knowledge, if one can call it that. That is to say, knowledge that is revealed to human beings from a higher source, from a divinity, from a holy text, whatever that text may be. It might even be a secular holy text. It might be a communist manifesto, for example. It is writ. It is holy writ to those who read it. It cannot ultimately be questioned. There can be exegesis which examines it, which marvels at its brilliance, which takes apart all that puts it together and proves its greatness. 2,000 years, give or take, that has been the case in our culture, I speak very broadly here, with the Holy Bible. For less than that, it's been true of the Quran. For longer than that, it's been true of the Talmud, the Torah. These are revealed truths. Now, we don't really know how they were given to us. We have to make enormous assumptions about how they were somehow inspired into the heads of those who wrote them. In the case of the Quran, one single prophet. In the case of the Bible, a whole slew of prophets, and then a whole slew of synods and meetings which eventually tried to canonize, to make canonical that what we now call the Holy Bible. Various books were thrown out, various books were included, and so on, until a canonical Bible was arrived at. Very recent. And this gave us revealed truth. It was a truth by which one could live and by which one should live, and which it was very difficult for a long time to question, under pain of physical torture. There's another kind of truth. There's an Aristotelian word that he uses, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, anagnorisis, discovery, a discovered truth. How do you discover a truth? And must each individual discover the truth for himself? He can't take it on trust from his parents and his teachers. No, it's not quite that. It's truth that can be demonstrated, truth that can be shown. Truth that a teacher can squat on the ground and with a stick in the dust or with a chalk on a board or a stylus into wax can say, look, this is how it works. What do you think? Does that convince you? Can you see that that might be true? And on top of that is the sum of one's own experience, one's own apprehension. This is discovered truth. Now, discovered truth flourished, it seemed, and I'm asking for forgiveness for those classical scholars amongst me, but it flourished in ancient Greece, in Athens, for some time. Certainly a golden period of Aristotle and Socrates and Plato. We're all familiar with the idea of it, and let's imagine, even if it isn't true, that there was a time when this spirit existed. And then let's imagine that for 1,000 years or more, it was quenched, and the only truth was revealed truth. The only way you could understand the way the universe was composed, the way stars moved, the way people felt, the way justice should be meted out, the way people should live, the right they had to complain at how hungry they were, how their children should be raised. All of this came from a book, and the only ones who were able to read the book were those privileged and authorized to do so by what was known as an apostolic succession. Quite literally, the leader of this particular religion, Christianity, laid his hands on his followers, his disciples, and they laid their hands on others, and so on, so that everybody who was given holy orders in this church could claim to have had a laying on of hands all the way back to the founder of the religion. And they were the only ones who were able to extrapolate, to interpret this book. It seems to us now, perhaps, absurd that our ancestors could have lived for 1,500 years under such an imposition without complaint, without pouring into town squares as they're doing at the moment in northern Africa, without shaking their fists at such injustice, such stupidity. It's a mistake for us to be too damning of our ancestors. For all of us are descended from people who never thought to question the authority of the hierarchs and the priests. They never thought there was any other answer. It seems mysterious to us that the light of the ancient Greeks should have glimmered so briefly, should have been put out so completely. But as I think we all know, it hadn't been put out completely. And slowly, over the 13th, 14th, 15th and 16th centuries, people started to read those Greeks again. A kind of genie escaped from the bottle, a genie of free inquiry. And it took root in the 17th and 18th centuries in a way that is, to this day, astonishing. All kinds of free inquiry started to be engaged with. Science. In the 17th century, the Royal Society in England began, and Isaac Newton started to work on the laws of light and the laws that we now know of as gravity and motion, the things that underpin all physics in our world today. And in France, political movements began, printing began to be cheaper and freer, and ideas began to be disseminated in a quite extraordinary way. And slowly, but absolutely ineluctably and remorselessly, the power of the church was pushed back. And we call this the Enlightenment. We call it the Enlightenment for good reason, because the light of reason was shone into every corner of human experience. It's the social, the political, the emotional, the spiritual. In every sphere, we were encouraged to think anew and to think according to principles, yes, of reason, but more importantly, empirically, which is to say, there is reason. You can say it is reasonable to suppose this, that, or the other. The beauty of science and the beauty of free thought is that it doesn't stop there. Reason is almost akin to superstition. You may think this is a very odd thing to say. Surely humanism stands up for reason above all things. No, reason, like anything else, must be tested. Blaise Pascal, the great French mathematician and philosopher, reasoned about light. And everything he said about light seemed so reasonable. Now, I'm not going to make an anti-French comment here, but it's perhaps typical of the French that they would never, in those days, have dreamed of dirtying their hands in order to prove their theory about light, because their theory about light was reasonable. But Isaac Newton, being British and clumsy and dirty and unafraid of getting his fingernails torn, poked a hole in a piece of cardboard and demonstrated that what Pascal said was actually untrue. And this is one of the great moments of empiricism. It's testing. You don't only question, you test. That is the very basis of science. If science has a definition, and everybody tries, mine is humility before the facts. It doesn't matter how reasonable what you say is. It doesn't matter how beautiful your theory is. You must be humble and supplicant in front of the facts that open up in front of you. And that is what all great scientists have been. They've been imaginative, yes. They've been fantastically artistic in some cases, inspirational in many cases. But they've always been humble in front of the facts. Now all this is the joke of the age in which we live. All this is like me describing color theory or describing who Shakespeare was. It's so fucking obvious that it's astonishing it needs to be said. Because I grew up in an age in which the Enlightenment sort of ruled. There were people who went to church and who believed in God. Now, I want all of you to understand it is no part of a humanist's job to mock an individually pious and devout individual. That's not who we are. We are not interested in persuading them against their religion. I have no interest in telling a devout Catholic, a devout Muslim, a devout Jew that they are wrong, that there is no God. Why should I bother to do such a thing? If they are happy, it is none of my business. However, I think we know the corollary. It is none of their fucking business what I believe either. And it is not their business to impose their revealed truth on the extraordinary world of doubt, skepticism, empiricism, reason, and enlightenment that we have built. A flawed world, a world that is filled with contradiction, ambiguities, and problems. A world that is almost insoluble, and yet in which everybody has the most important freedom of all, and that is the freedom to think, the freedom to express ideas without the sense that they will be consigned either to a literal or a metaphorical hellfire and abomination by those who claim some warrant from some God whom they have not proved exists and whom they cannot, in any sense, convince reasonable people has power over them.